Hey guys, welcome back to our channel, The Purpose-Driven Homestead. Today we're going to provide you an update on our meat chickens, and we're going to share with you a little bit about what we've experienced so far and our first time growing, so stick around. Hey guys, so it's week 6 now. We got these chicks at the very end of July, and we're gonna wind up processing them at about 8 to 10 weeks. So we've only got 2 to 4 weeks left, depending on how fast these guys grow, before we go to the processing phase. And we're gonna give you guys a video on that too, so stay tuned. Don't worry about that. We've actually got another video that'll probably come out before then on our quail and how we're processing those as well. So anyway, we got a lot of stuff going on here. It is a beautiful fall day here. It's only in the 60s. It's still the morning, and it is extremely pleasant. We had some much needed rain over the last few days, which was fantastic. It's been a really dry summer here in the Midwest where we live, so the rain was absolutely very, very welcome. Now, you can see over my shoulder here, these guys are our Cornish Cross. Now, when I say Cornish Cross, that's the type or variety of bird that you would typically find in any of your grocery stores in the United States, and often quite frequently worldwide. So they are hybrid breeds, so they're a cross between 2 other breeds. They're not a genetically modified animal in the sense that their genes have been modified, but they are a cross between 2 varieties that give them 2 very specific benefits when you're talking about meat birds. 1, they grow at a phenomenal rate, and then 2, they're built a little different than a standard chicken. Now, most standard chickens are gonna kind of have a smaller, thinner, split breast that you're gonna work with. They're gonna be a little darker meat. These guys are going to have this large breast in the front, and I'll show you a little bit of video here on that, but they're going to have this very large breast that is different looking than a standard chicken, and that's obviously just because of the way that they've been bred to provide the larger breast that most people are going to be used to when they go to the grocery store. So when you go to the grocery store and you pick up a package of breast meat, those breasts are really, really large, and that's because they're using the Cornish Cross. That's the typical one. If you were to buy a normal chicken, that breast that's been cut up, you would see a very radically different chicken than what you're used to, and that's okay. We decided to grow these because, 1, it's in a way for us to get some experience growing this Cornish Cross, understand a little bit about them. A lot of people, like including Joel Salatin, have described these guys as a race car breed. They are definitely built different. They don't graze the same way, they don't eat the same way, they don't have the same nutrient requirements as a regular chicken, and it's because they grow so fast. Now, how fast, you might ask? How fast did these things grow? They grow super fast, 8 weeks. That's in comparison to, it takes about 6 months for a normal chicken to get to a maturity, like a laying egg maturity, that kind of stuff, or where you would typically want to butcher them. These guys get to that weight for somewhere between 5 to 7 pounds, and 4 to 5 pounds dressed out, but 5 to 7 pounds live weight. They get to that point in only 8 weeks, and that is really, really fast. Now, again, it's due to the way that they've been crossed and the type of breed that they are, that they grow that fast. And it actually can cause some problems if you're not careful. These things can grow really, really fast and get off to the point that they grow so fast that their legs aren't strong enough to hold them up. So I'm going to say something now that's going to probably ruffle a few feathers. Now, that's pun intended here, but we're raising our chickens in a completely different way than they would be raised if they were in a confinement house shop, right? So we're not raising them with any growth hormones, we're not raising them with any vaccines, we're not raising them with anything. If you're okay with that, no problem at all. Just continue to buy your chickens from the grocery store. But we wanted to try something a little different. We wanted to have something that we knew where it came from, we knew what was put into the chickens, and we really do believe that there's something to be said for raising the animals on pasture and in a way that it allows them to kind of do the things that they were designed to do. We like them to be able to scratch. We like them to be able to do all the things that God intended them to do out here in the yard or in pasture. And so our concept is we want to follow the Joel Salatin method, which is pasture-raised poultry. And again, this is just for us, but we haven't done any of the growth hormones. We haven't given them any vaccines. We haven't done any of that kind of stuff, right? So these chicks, we intentionally chose them from the factory. We told them not to inoculate them. We wanted to raise them just purely on the grass to see what kind of results we would get. And if they all died off, we'd know then that these things needed a different treatment, right? That we know that they would need the vaccines, but we wanted to at least try it without all of that. Now the key difference though is that we are raising them on pasture. We're using a tractor that we built, and we'll do a video for that very shortly. We've got it out there already, just kind of, we're working on some of the editing. So if you follow Joel Salatin at all, you'll know that he is a big advocate for chlorophyll and just kind of the natural resources that these chickens have access to when they're on pasture, different than when they're in a confinement house, right? And they're limited to just walking around in sawdust shavings with nothing to peck on that's that's green. They don't see any sunlight, they don't get any fresh air, they don't get any of that kind of stuff, right? And even when you open up those windows and you open up those big doors and the fans blow through those confinement houses, right? There's still a big difference between that and raising them on pasture. And so again, if you're okay with that, no problem. There's a great market for that. That's just not what we wanted to try. We wanted to try something very different. So one of the things that we tell you guys all the time is do what you can with what you have, right? That's a motto that we try to live by here. We don't always have all the same resources, but do what you can with what you have. Whether that means you're in an apartment complex, or if you're in a home, or if you're in a suburban environment, or if you're in a subdivision, there's still things that you can do to grow and raise some of your own food, at least some of it, right? And so this is an example. So we've got this tractor behind us here. We have been doing this all in our yard, right? So this is just our backyard that we have. You can see the lawnmower set up back there, right? So it's not prettied up, it's just our backyard, right? And that's where these guys have been the entire 8 weeks. And so we have been moving them little by little. Now, as they get bigger, they have to be moved every day. But for a little while, you can actually get around with just moving them every other day or every few days. And that's because they're really small and they don't take up a lot of space. But as they get older, they do churn it up. Now, we've learned a few things while having these guys on pasture. So the first thing is that they eat very different than a standard chicken. These guys are extremely motivated based off of food. I think they're just hungry all the time. Now, we've been upping their rations every day, but we also don't want to feed them to the point that they grow too fast. Now, that's a big thing that we've heard and we've read about on these Cornish Crosses, and I think that's because people wind up providing food all the time for their chickens, right? So there's always food inside there. It allows them to eat as much as they want at any time, right? So the chickens, these guys are very different. Now, if you look over my shoulder, they're not really grazing at this point during the day that much. Now, our other chickens, our hens that are out right now, our layers, they're out and about doing their thing. These guys just don't graze the same way or nearly as efficiently as a backyard laying hen does. So that's a very different thing. So we keep them confined in the tractor the whole time. That allows them to be safe from predators, but it does allow them to graze some, and it even encourages it. And as I was mentioning before, we don't leave the food in there just a max amount so that it's always there. We actually want them to eat their food, and then if they're still hungry, we want them to graze. We want them to actually take some of the stuff, the bugs, the gravels that they need to kind of get in their gizzard and that kind of stuff. We want them to be able to do all of those things, pick at the greenery, pick at the grass, pick at the clover, all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to show you here exactly what I mean here when I say that. So I don't know if you guys can see it here or not, but this is taller grass over here where we haven't had the chickens. We had the rabbits here not that long ago, but then you can see very distinctly here, this is where the chickens were just recently. You can kind of see the outline of where they were. So this is just a couple of days. We actually had to turn them and make a U-turn to go back up a hill because we kind of got into a tight spot here. But you notice that's what that looks like. But then right to the edge of it, you can see really easily kind of the difference between the grass that they eat, what they don't. And then this is the prior day. You see they really eat the grass up big time. But come back, this was the prior day. And then the day before that. And once we go back a little ways, there's almost no sign of where they were. As you can see here, the grass is almost completely grown back. So you've seen some of the work that they do on the yard, right? And they definitely graze it down. So that's why as they get older, you have to move the tractor every single day. And we are going to be providing them more and more food as we have, right? We're growing that amount. We're seeing how much they need. But one of the things that we learned is we take their feed and we put a little bit in a feeder, but then we also take that same feed and we dump it all around inside the tractor. And what that does is that encourages them to scratch. And as they're eating that feed, which is really what they want, right? That's the thing that they're super excited about. It allows them to also pick up some of that greenery as well. And that allows them, we think, to be a much healthier chicken, right? They're getting a lot more in the way of a balanced nutrient support than they would if they just ate grains from a feed bag, right? So some of the other things that we've learned through this haven't all been good. What we learned is that early on, when we got these guys out, they were about a week and a half old, and it was really warm, right? So it was the middle of the summer, so we weren't worried about the temperatures. They grow really fast, so the chicks were already larger than, month-old chicks that we would normally get for, like, say, laying hens. So the chicks were of a good size. They could keep themselves warm. We put them on pasture inside of here, but what we found out is that, as you guys probably well know, chicks are a main dish on every single predator under the sun. And what we did is we put them on pasture probably a week too early. Maybe 14 or so days is probably when we should have done that. Although if you follow Joel Salatin approach, we really did put them on at the time that people have recommended. But in our case, our yard's a little uneven, and especially here in our backyard, it's sloped and there's some spots where there's some gaps. And so what happened is we're 99% sure that a skunk got in and grabbed 5 chicks in one night. So it was their second night on pasture. It got in there and it just decimated. We only got 22 to start off with. We bought 20. The hatchery gave us an extra 2 just because a lot of times some don't make it in the shipment. We didn't have that problem, but that's pretty common. So they loaded 22. All of them survived, but we lost 5 on that first night, or second night, I should say. So we had them the first night, no problem. Second night, 5 of them were gone. So we had to wind up using bags and putting up some rocks and some wooden pieces, right? Some long 10-foot boards just around the tractor where we had some gaps. And that did stop it. We didn't have any other problems with predators. Now, we don't do that anymore. They're big enough now, as you can see the background at this point, that a skunk and things like that aren't going to mess with them. Coyotes, it would take them forever to dig underneath here, so we haven't had any problems with those as well, even though we do have coyotes here, even in our backyard, right? So where we live, it is rural enough, and there's even city coyotes around here that wind up roaming in some of the neighborhoods, but we haven't had any problems at all. This is heavy enough, it's a big enough deal that it really isn't an issue for these guys. And again, they're big enough now that skunks and other things aren't going to try to prey on them, but when they were chicks, that was a big thing. So that's one thing we would absolutely do differently, is know that when you put these guys on pasture as chicks at, say, the 10 to 14 day mark, they are food for everything. So make sure that you secure any gaps underneath there. And the gap that we're talking about was maybe that big. It was only probably 2 or 3 inches in a small space, 3 or 4 inches wide. But we could see where something really small had burrowed underneath there and had taken those chicks out. It was a really sad thing, but it's a learning exercise, right? Everything is food for everything else, essentially. So that's something that we learned that I would say isn't necessarily a positive thing, but it did help us. That so for next time, we'll know, hey, when we put them on pasture, they did fine from a health perspective, but we got to make sure that we account for predators and that predator pressure. So we were at 17 chicks after the predator event, and then we wound up losing 1 more due to just general sickness. We're not really sure what happened. It was 1 chick. There was no indication that it was ever sick. There was no problems. We actually did have 1 chick that got injured by that predator event, but it wasn't that one. That one actually fully recovered. There's a little spot on its wing, but it's done fine. So we're not sure what happened to this 1 chick. It happened around the 4-week mark, so they were getting some size on them at that point. But it's unfortunate, but a reality is not every chick will make it, and so that's why you get a few extra, because you know that you're going to probably have some problems. I think most people, like Joel Salatin, they say they account for 5 to 10% loss in their flock. So if you need to have 100, you need to overshoot that by 5 to 10%, because you're going to have some that are going to die. They're going to just not make it, and that's a fact of life. So think about that when you're factoring in how many chicks that you need. Know that some of them aren't going to make it. That's just reality. They're either going to not make it to you from the hatchery, or they're not going to make it once you get them onto your property and you actually start feeding them. Even if you do everything right, it's just reality. So one of the other things that we've learned throughout this process is that these chickens look different than a regular laying hen, and you need to be prepared for that. We always used to think that these guys look so scroungy, and you know, I always remember watching videos on TV, on YouTube, or on you know, reading about these guys, and I always saw them and they seem to have fewer feathers, and they just always look scroungy and rough. And I always thought to myself, man, these guys must not be taking care of their chickens, because I was used to laying hens and the full feathers. Unless they're molting, they look great and they just don't have any, they're not missing any feathers. However, with these chickens, one of the big things is they've been bred over time to have fewer feathers. So that makes it easier when you're doing the plucking later on when you're processing, right? These are designed to be meat birds. They live a great life, or at least ours are, while they're here. They're on pasture and they're enjoying life, but they do have a purpose, right? And so these have been bred to have fewer feathers. And so as you see them throughout the process, they're gonna have fewer feathers. They're missing them. You kind of can see their skin through it. That's absolutely normal. And it was a little bit of a learning for us because of our experiences before, but don't get startled. Don't think that there's a problem with your chickens. That's how they're supposed to look. They just simply have fewer feathers, and in a lot of cases around where their wings attach, the bottom of their body, even in parts of their breast, they're just gonna have fewer feathers. So they might have quite a few feathers on their backs, but underneath, it's just you're gonna see their skin through their feathers, and it's because that's how they've been bred. All right, guys, so that's the update on our meat chickens, right? I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about it with us. Again, we'll in another 3 or so weeks, we'll probably be doing the processing on these guys, and we'll provide you another update. But for now, we've really enjoyed having them. They're super simple, and you can see here behind me, right? They don't make any noise, and that's something that if you're in a backyard homestead or if you're in a subdivision, that's something that may work really well for you. Hey guys, so that's the update on our meat chickens today. We really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please click that thumbs up like button. Also, subscribe to our channel. It helps us grow and allows us to reach more people and share some of the things that you can do in your backyard. We hope you have a blessed day, and we'll see you next time on the Purpose Driven Homestead.